Hey, welcome to this week's Climate Coffee with me, Josh Gilbert. I want to talk about climate justice today. There's been a lot of talk about it in regards to COP22. A lot of the promises, over $1 billion supposed to be going into it that haven't happened yet. And really climate change is happening. We see it here in Britain, we see it in the US, but it's most keenly felt in many of the developing economies who can't actually defend themselves from the worst effects. So I wanted to highlight a few of these things today. Firstly, African countries are struggling to access money set aside to prepare for climate change. And really, this is from Carbon Brief, and we're seeing that half of the world's most climate vulnerable nations have missed out on first rounds of grant funding for adaptation projects that should have come from the UN's Green Climate Fund. These adaptation projects include planting trees to prevent expansion of deserts or building flood defences, and they're particularly important for nations in the global south, where, as I said, these things are happening and felt most keenly. So far, adaptation has been severely underfunded, not just in these countries, but in general, and certainly from the models, when we look at the forward-looking probabilistic exposure levels, these things are only going to get even worse. And heat stress, actually, when we do this modelling at SUS Global, when we integrate all these different data sources, heat stress is often highest on the list. So to that effect, we've also seen that a story from Bloomberg Green, or the Bloomberg City Labs, they talk about Sierra Leone and the first ever heat officer in Africa. So this is Eugenia Cargbo, who really is there to raise public awareness of extreme heat, improving protection and responding to heat waves. Sierra Leone, the capital city of Freetown, has had huge amounts of heat-caused deaths, also flooding and landslides. And obviously this comes from a lack of climate adaptation, but it also comes from the fact that these cities are rapidly growing. There's a huge population. There are areas of the city where these types of things aren't built in adequately, and it's causing real problems. For example, many of the houses aren't made out of the right materials, and they are heating up. They're kind of not insulating, not protecting these families and these people from the heat. So not only do we have to assess climate-related effects, which we'll get into in a minute, and I think geospatial data is incredibly important there. We also need to build in these adaptation measures, roll up our sleeves, and really work out, not just in the global south, how we can fund these projects, because they don't have often the economic means to do this themselves, but also how to have this awareness to build in adaptation measures into our economies in the global north, such as protection from flooding, protection from wildfires in California. And really we need to have public awareness. We have to have deliberate decision making, as well as broader governmental bodies, to make sure that we can start to build in these defences, because people's lives are being lost to it today, and it's going to get a lot worse. In the UK alone, heat-related deaths are going to triple by 2050 if we don't mitigate climate change. So lastly, I really want to talk about geospatial data and how it can help tackling some of these problems. We've heard from the Carbon Brief report and the Bloomberg report, but there's one from EDI, which comes directly from climate, or from the OS, the Ordnance Survey in the UK, not to be confused with Climate OS. And billions are flowing into measures that fight climate change. But this article from OS argues that we don't know, are we investing in the right areas? And we often don't know, how can we track the impact of these measurements? And that's where geospatial technology can come in. There's a great stat in this article that says digital tech can help reduce global emissions by 15%, which is 1/3 of 50% reduction targets required by 2030. So really, yes, we need adaptation, but we also need to assess and understand where these effects are going to be most keenly felt, and also to manage and mitigate the emissions that are actually coming out of industrial facilities. So for example, today, carbon accounting is normally done through Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 balance sheet. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions effectively come from a balance sheet, and there's no real validation in understanding what's really going on at the asset level. So for example, through geospatial data, some of the models that SUS Global have developed, and the ways that we can frictionlessly integrate them into these company workflows, we can actually enable these companies to accurately track in real time the emissions that are coming from their facilities. The ED article also points out ways that geospatial can help. It can protect us from heat waves. Climate change is to blame for 37% of heat-related deaths globally, and it's only going to get worse. And by being able to monitor these types of things, we can make significant advances. a company doing work in this type of thing in the upstream satellite space is Satellite View, a company based in the UK. They're launching satellites to do thermal imaging to accurately assess housing that is the highest in terms of, or lowest in efficiency and bleeding the most heat, also in terms of looking at the industrial emitters and holding these companies accountable. So geospatial data plays a crucial part in these processes. If you want to hear more about these stories, please subscribe to the Climate Coffee newsletter. It comes out every week. We also have in there an update on Larry Fink and some of the updates from his annual letter that came out, as well as some of the news around climate risk regulation, such as news from Singapore and a whole lot more. So please do make sure, I'll put a link below, make sure you subscribe to that. Thank you so much for following on Climate Coffee. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up at SUS Global soon as well. Really working on not just providing validated data, but creating the integrations and the APIs to enable an ecosystem that can fight these climate issues, such as climate adaptation, such as climate mitigation, and really raising awareness and raising action within our communities. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week.